She looked at me across our kitchen table, the one where we'd eaten thousands of meals as a family, and said, "I want a divorce. I want a different life, a richer one." And I remember thinking the hardest part would be those words. But I was wrong because the hardest part turned out to be watching how quickly she started treating our kids like they were my project instead of our shared life. My name is Ruben, and this is the story of how my wife left me for what she called the rich life, disappeared for 2 years, then came back expecting me to drop everything, including the woman who actually stayed. But by then, I'd already learned something she never would. That love isn't about Instagram stories from rooftop bars. It's about showing up when your kid has a fever at 3 in the morning. Let me take you back to when things were normal, or at least what I thought was normal. Because looking back now, I can see the cracks forming even in our happiest moments. We weren't rich, but we were solid. I worked as an operations manager at a logistics company, steady income, decent benefits, nothing flashy but reliable, and Alina worked part-time at a dental office doing scheduling and patient coordination. Our apartment was a 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where kids rode bikes in the parking lot and neighbors knew each other's names. And yeah, it wasn't huge, but it was ours, filled with Max's soccer trophies and Lily's drawings covering the fridge like wallpaper. Weekend mornings, I'd make pancakes while the kids argued about what cartoon to watch. Alina would shuffle and still half asleep and steal bites off their plates, and those moments felt complete in a way I didn't appreciate until they were gone. We had routines that weren't exciting, but they were ours. Homework at the kitchen table, while I helped Max with fractions, and Alina braided Lily's hair for the next day. Movie nights where we'd all pile on the couch under blankets. Sunday cleaning sessions where we'd blast old music and dance with the vacuum. It wasn't the life you see in magazines, but it was real, and I thought we were happy. I really did. But somewhere along the way, Alina started measuring our life against a ruler I didn't even know existed. The change started so slowly, I almost missed it. She'd come home from meeting her girlfriends, and suddenly our apartment felt smaller to her. Our car felt older. Our vacation to the lake house we rented felt embarrassing compared to wherever her friends had gone. Her friend circle had shifted over the past year. Women she'd known from the gym and the dental office. And they all seemed to be dating or married to men who worked in finance or owned businesses. The kind of guys who posted pictures from Miami on a random Wednesday. Alina started spending more time on her phone scrolling through their stories, double-tapping photos of designer handbags and restaurant meals that cost more than our weekly grocery budget. And I'd catch her staring at her screen with this look on her face like she'd just realized she'd been living in black and white while everyone else got color. She never said "I love you" less. She just started saying things like, "Sarah's boyfriend took her to Napa for the weekend," or "Did you see Jessica's new car?" And at first I'd laugh it off, make some joke about how we had our own kind of wealth, but the jokes started landing flat because she wasn't laughing anymore. The breaking point came on a regular evening, nothing special about it. I was at our small desk in the corner of the living room going through our monthly budget spreadsheet, because that's what responsible adults do. Calculating the payment for the apartment we were saving to buy, the kids' school expenses, car insurance, the usual stuff that keeps a family running. Alina was on the couch scrolling through her phone, and I could hear the little sound effects from Instagram stories, that swoosh noise that meant she was tapping through dozens of posts. And when I glanced over, I could see the glow of her screen reflected on her face. All those carefully filtered images of luxury and ease. Then she just exploded, not screaming exactly, but this frustrated outburst where she said, "This is it? This is our life. Bills and budgets and nothing exciting ever." And I looked up from the laptop confused because we'd just taken the kids to the amusement park 2 weeks ago. We'd had a great time, but apparently that didn't count. She kept going, talking about how her friends were living real lives, how they got surprised with jewelry and trips, how their partners made things happen instead of just maintaining, and I felt something cold settle in my chest because I realized she wasn't talking about our marriage anymore. She was talking about a transaction she felt she'd lost out on. I tried to stay calm, asked her what she wanted, what would make her happy, and she looked at me with these distant eyes and said, "I don't know. Maybe I just want more." But she couldn't tell me what more meant, just that whatever we had wasn't it. The next few weeks were brutal in this quiet, suffocating way. We didn't fight loudly or throw things. We just existed in the same space while she pulled further and further away, and the kids noticed even though we tried to hide it. Max asked me why Mommy was always on her phone now, and I didn't have a good answer. Then one night after the kids were asleep, she sat me down and said it clearly, said she wanted a divorce, said she needed to explore what else life could offer, said she felt like she'd settled too young and missed out on experiences. I could have begged, could have promised to somehow make more money or be more exciting or whatever she thought she needed. But something in me just went still and quiet because I realized you can't compete with a fantasy. You can't win against an Instagram feed. And if she wanted to go chase that life, then no amount of pancake breakfasts or stable love was going to stop her. So I said okay. Said if that's what she wanted, then we'd do it the right way. No drama, no fighting. We'd split custody fairly and keep things civil for the kids. And I think my calmness broke something in her because she'd expected a fight, expected me to fall apart and prove how much I needed her. But instead, I was already thinking practically about how to protect Max and Lily from the fallout. She moved out within a month, found a small studio apartment closer to downtown where her friends lived, and we set up a custody schedule that started as 50-50, but within weeks became more like 70-30, because she kept having plans come up, girls' trips and dinners, and events that apparently couldn't be rescheduled around her parenting time. The kids would pack their little backpacks to go stay with her and come back confused, telling me about how mommy's apartment was tiny and didn't have space for their toys, how she'd let them watch TV instead of doing homework because she had to get ready to go out. I never said anything negative about her to them. That was a line I refused to cross, but I started keeping detailed records of every missed pickup, every schedule change, every time I had to leave work early because she'd forgotten she was supposed to have them. Our divorce was finalized after 3 months, quick and clean because there wasn't much to fight over. She didn't want the apartment or the savings. She wanted freedom, and I gave it to her while keeping the only things that mattered, our kids and the stability they desperately needed. I thought the pain would fade once it was official, once the papers were signed and she was legally free to chase whatever life she imagined was waiting for her. But actually it got harder because then I had to watch from a distance as she transformed into someone I didn't recognize, posting stories from expensive restaurants with men whose faces she never quite showed, wearing clothes I knew she couldn't afford, talking about manifesting abundance and living her best life while our kids asked me why mommy didn't come to Max's soccer games anymore. The worst part wasn't losing her. I'd made peace with that. The worst part was watching her choose the performance of happiness over the real thing. Choosing validation from strangers online over the two little people who just wanted their mom to show up and be present. I'd lie in bed at night in our apartment that felt too big and too empty now, listening to the sound of the kids breathing in their rooms. And I'd think about how she'd said love didn't pay for trips or jewelry. And I'd wonder if she'd ever understand that love actually paid for everything that mattered. The boring stuff, the 3M fevers, the patient homework help, the showing up day after day, even when it wasn't glamorous or Instagram worthy. But by then she was already gone, already posting champagne flutes at sunset, already convinced she'd escaped instead of abandoned, and all I could do was pick up the pieces and try to build something stable from the wreckage she'd left behind. The first time Lily asked me when mommy was coming home, I told her the truth as gently as I could. Said mommy had her own place now, and we'd see her on weekends. But 3 months later, when she asked the same question with this tiny broken voice, I realized she wasn't asking about a visit. She was asking if our family would ever be whole again. And I had to excuse myself to the bathroom, where I sat on the edge of the tub and cried as quietly as possible because I didn't want them to hear me fall apart. Those first 6 months after Alina left were the hardest stretch of my life. Not because I missed her, I was already past that, but because I had to be everything for Max and Lily while pretending I had it all figured out. And some days I'd get them to school and come home and just sit in the silence of our apartment wondering how the hell I was supposed to do this alone for the next 10 years. I stopped checking Alina's social media after the first month because it was like watching a stranger cosplay as my ex-wife. All these photos at rooftop lounges and luxury hotels with captions about deserving more and choosing yourself. And mutual friends would occasionally mention seeing her out with different guys. Always someone in finance or real estate. Always someone who looked like they'd never changed a diaper or helped with homework in their entire life. The kids' custody time with her became increasingly unpredictable. She'd have them for a weekend and return them Sunday night wired on sugar and exhausted because she'd taken them to some expensive brunch spot instead of letting them just be kids, or she'd cancel last minute with vague excuses about work events or feeling under the weather. And I'd have to comfort 2 confused children who couldn't understand why mommy's new life didn't seem to have much room for them. Max started acting out at school. His teacher called me in for a conference because he'd gotten into a fight with another kid, and when I asked him about it later that night, he just said the other kid had 2 parents who lived together and he'd gotten jealous, which broke something in me I didn't even know could still break. Lily developed this habit of clutching her stuffed rabbit whenever we talked about mommy. This little unconscious tell that she was anxious, and I'd watch her do it while pretending everything was fine and wonder what kind of therapy bills I'd be paying in 10 years because of all this. My life became this endless cycle of work and parenting with no break in between. I'd get up at 6 to make breakfast and pack lunches, drop the kids at school, work a full day while fielding texts from teachers or the school nurse, pick them up and immediately start the homework, dinner, bath, bedtime routine, then collapse on the couch at 9 and do it all over again the next day. I stopped accepting invitations to go out because I had no energy and no babysitter, stopped dating because the idea of explaining my situation to someone new felt exhausting, stopped doing pretty much anything that wasn't directly related to keeping my kids fed and emotionally stable. My brother called me once and said I sounded like a robot, said I needed to take care of myself too. But I didn't know how to explain that I didn't have the bandwidth for myself, that every ounce of energy I had went into making sure Max and Lily felt loved and secure despite their mother essentially abandoning them for Instagram likes and expensive dinners. Around the 1-year mark, I started hearing things through mutual friends that Alina's glamorous life wasn't quite what it seemed. Whispers about her dating a guy who turned out to be married, about her bouncing between apartments because she couldn't afford the rent in the trendy neighborhoods she wanted to live in, about her working multiple part-time gigs to fund the lifestyle she was posting about. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad for her. Sad that she'd blown up our family chasing some fantasy that was never real to begin with, and sad that our kids were paying the price for her midlife crisis, or whatever you want to call it. She'd still show up for her scheduled weekends sometimes, always looking polished and put together, and she'd take the kids to do something expensive like a trampoline park or a fancy movie theater. But she'd bring them back, and they'd tell me about how mommy spent most of the time on her phone or how she'd gotten frustrated when they acted like normal kids instead of accessories to her new life. Then around month 15 something shifted. I was at Max's soccer game on a Saturday morning. One of those cold, early games where your breath makes clouds and you're clutching terrible coffee just to stay warm. And I noticed this woman sitting a few rows down who I'd seen at previous games but never really paid attention to. Her name was Vanessa, and she had a son on Max's team. And after the game, while we were all standing around watching the kids chase each other, she struck up a conversation about how chaotic Saturday mornings were with youth sports. And something about the way she laughed, genuine and unpretentious, made me realize I hadn't had a normal adult conversation in months. We started talking more at games and practices. Nothing romantic, just friendly parent chat. And she mentioned she was divorced too. Said her ex had moved to another state for work and saw their son maybe once a month. And there was this unspoken understanding between us. This recognition of each other's exhaustion and determination to show up anyway. Vanessa started appearing in our lives gradually. So slowly, I almost didn't notice at first. She'd offer to carpool to practice and stay to chat afterward. Or we'd end up at the same playground on Sunday afternoons, and the kids would play together while we talked. She never pried into my situation, but she listened when I needed to vent. And more importantly, she was just easy to be around. No drama or demands or expectations, just presence. One evening about 6 months after we'd started becoming friends, Lily came down with a nasty fever. The kind that spikes to 103 and makes you panic, and I was juggling trying to get her temperature down while also making sure Max ate dinner and did his homework. And Vanessa texted asking how Lily was doing because Max had mentioned it at practice. I admitted I was overwhelmed, and she showed up 20 minutes later with soup and children's medicine. Didn't make a big deal about it, just helped me get through the evening and left once things were under control. And that night after the kids were asleep, I sat in the kitchen and realized I hadn't felt that supported since before my marriage fell apart. Things developed naturally from there. Vanessa would come over on weekends and help Max with a science project or play board games with Lily. She'd join us for pizza nights and somehow make our little apartment feel less empty. And the kids started lighting up when she was around in a way that made my chest tight because they were so starved for positive adult attention that wasn't coming from their mother. I was terrified to let myself feel anything for her, because what if I screwed it up? What if the kids got attached, and then she left too? What if I was just using her as a band-aid for my loneliness? But she was patient with my hesitation, never pushed for more than I could give, and slowly I started to trust that maybe this could be something real. We didn't rush into anything, didn't even kiss until we'd known each other for 8 months. And when we finally had the conversation about being in a relationship, it felt less like falling and more like choosing. Choosing stability and kindness, and someone who showed up not for the Instagram story, but for the regular boring Tuesday nights. The kids adjusted to having Vanessa around faster than I expected. She never tried to replace Alina or act like a mom. She was just herself, and that authenticity made all the difference. She'd sit on the floor doing puzzles with Lily or throw a football with Max in the parking lot, and they started mentioning her casually like she was just part of their world now. I felt guilty, sometimes wondering if I had the right to move on when Alina was out there somewhere, presumably living her best life. But then I'd watch Vanessa help Lily sound out words for a school project or listen to Max's rambling stories about his day with genuine interest, and I'd realize this wasn't about replacing anything. It was about building something new from the pieces we all had left. Life felt manageable again. Not perfect, but stable. We had routines that worked and a little chosen family that showed up for each other. And for the first time in 2 years, I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning in responsibility and loneliness. Then one afternoon, I was at work staring at spreadsheets when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. But somehow I knew immediately who it was even before I opened it. The text said, "We need to talk. I want to come back to the family." And my stomach dropped, not because I missed her or wanted her back, but because I knew whatever conversation we were about to have was going to blow up the careful stability I'd built. And I thought about Vanessa and the kids and the life we'd created together. And I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't going to let Alina walk back in and destroy it just because she'd finally realized the grass wasn't greener. It was just different grass with its own problems, and now she wanted to come back to the lawn she'd set on fire. I agreed to meet Alina at a coffee shop halfway between our places, neutral territory where neither of us had home advantage. And I showed up 15 minutes early because I needed time to settle my nerves and remember why I was doing this. Not to reconcile, but to set boundaries that should have existed from the beginning. She walked in looking different, still put together, but there was something tired around her eyes, something that expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. And she smiled at me like we were old friends meeting for a catch-up instead of two people whose marriage had imploded because she'd wanted champagne problems instead of real life. She started talking before I'd even finished my coffee. This rehearsed speech about how she'd grown so much over the past 2 years, how she'd learned that money and excitement weren't everything, how she'd realized family was what mattered. And I let her finish because I wanted to hear exactly how she'd justify abandoning our kids for Instagram validation and late-night bottle service. When she finally paused for breath, she said, "I want us to try again. I want to come back." And I looked at her across that table and felt absolutely nothing. No anger or longing or even satisfaction. Just this calm certainty that she was no longer my problem to solve. I kept my voice even when I responded. Told her that ship had sailed the moment she'd chosen her new life over our family. Told her she was still Max and Lily's mother, and I'd never interfere with that relationship. But she and I were done. Permanently and completely done. She blinked like she'd been slapped, like it had never occurred to her that I might have moved on. And then her expression shifted from shock to something uglier, something entitled and accusatory. She asked if there was someone else, and I told her the truth. Said yes, I was seeing someone who'd been there through fevers and homework meltdowns and all the regular moments she'd decided weren't worth her time. And Alina's face went red with anger that had no right to exist given she'd been the one who left. She said, "So you replaced me." And I had to fight not to laugh at the audacity, had to remind myself that getting angry would only drag this out. So instead I explained as simply as possible that Vanessa hadn't replaced anyone. She'd just filled the empty space Alina had left behind. Shown up when showing up mattered. And that wasn't replacement, it was just reality. The conversation should have ended there, but Alina wasn't done. She started talking about the kids and how they needed their real family back together. How confusing it must be for them to have some stranger playing house. And that's when I felt my composure crack just slightly, because she was trying to use Max and Lily as weapons after barely seeing them consistently for 2 years. I told her the kids were fine, better than fine actually. They had stability and routine, and people who showed up for them every single day. And if she wanted to be more involved in their lives, I'd support that, but it would be on a schedule that worked for everyone, not just her convenience. She didn't like that answer, started talking about how she had rights as their mother, how she could get a lawyer and fight for more custody. And I pulled out my phone and showed her the document I'd been keeping, every missed pickup, every canceled weekend, every time I'd had to rearrange my entire life because she'd flaked, and I watched her face go pale as she realized I'd been documenting everything. Over the next few months, Alina did exactly what I'd feared. She started trying to buy her way back into the kids' affections with expensive gifts and big promises. Told Max she'd get him the new gaming system he wanted. Told Lily they'd go to Disneyland next summer, even though I knew she couldn't afford it. The kids came back from her weekends loaded down with toys and sugar and completely off their routine, staying up late because she didn't enforce bedtime. skipping homework because she wanted to take them to the mall instead, and I'd spend the first half of every week getting them back on track. Max's teacher emailed me concerned because he'd stopped turning in assignments, and when I asked him about it, he admitted Mommy said homework could wait because they were having special time together, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying what I really thought about Alina's parenting priorities. The breaking point came on a random afternoon about 4 months after her return. Vanessa was at our apartment helping Lily practice her spelling words while I made dinner, and Max was in the living room building something with his blocks, completely absorbed in content. Alina showed up unannounced knocking on the door. It wasn't her day, but she wanted to take the kids to some event downtown. And when I opened the door and let her in, she saw Vanessa sitting at the kitchen table with Lily, and she froze, and I could see the rage building behind her eyes. Then Lily, sweet, innocent Lily who didn't understand the complicated adult politics happening around her, looked up at Vanessa and said, "Thanks, Mommy," because she'd gotten stuck on a word and Vanessa had helped her, and the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees instantly. Alina exploded in a way I'd never seen before, started yelling about how dare I let some woman confuse their children, how dare I allow this disrespect of their real mother. And Vanessa quietly excused herself and left while I ushered the kids to their room so they wouldn't hear the rest. Once they were gone, I turned to Alina and finally said what needed to be said, told her she couldn't show up sporadically and expect the kids to treat her like she'd never left, told her that Vanessa had earned their affection by being present for the boring, difficult parts of parenting that Alina had decided weren't worth her time. I said, "You don't get to come back into their lives with presents and promises and expect that to erase 2 years of absence. They need you in the regular moments too, the homework and the bedtime and the regular weekday dinners, not just the fun weekend events." And she looked at me like I'd stabbed her, like I was being cruel instead of honest. After that confrontation, Alina did something that honestly shocked me, even though it probably shouldn't have. She told the kids they weren't allowed to mention Vanessa when they were with her, said it hurt her feelings to hear about Daddy's friend, and suddenly Max and Lily were walking on eggshells trying to edit their own lives to avoid upsetting their mother. They stopped talking about our weekday routines or the fun things we did as a family unit, started treating their time with Alina like a separate reality that couldn't touch their real life, and I watched them grow more distant from her even as she tried harder to win them over with material things. She still tells people her version of the story, the one where I turned the kids against her or where Vanessa stole her family, never the version where she chose to leave and then couldn't handle the consequences of that choice. Years later now, with the kids in middle school, they live primarily with me and Vanessa, see their mother every other weekend when she remembers to confirm plans, and they're good kids, well-adjusted considering everything they've been through, but they're not close with Alina the way she wishes they were. She still posts on social media about being a devoted mother, still talks about the injustice of her situation to anyone who'll listen, still fundamentally believes that something was taken from her rather than understanding she gave it away. The scariest part isn't that she left. People leave marriages every day, and sometimes it's the right choice. The scary part is that she still doesn't understand why she couldn't just come back and have everything be the same, still doesn't grasp that love and family aren't things you can put on hold while you explore other options. And I think she's going to spend the rest of her life bitter about a loss that was entirely self-inflicted, blaming everyone except the person who actually made the choice to walk away. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.